All right, welcome. Today, we're diving into something truly incredible, an experiment that's happening right now, inside millions of heads all over the world. We're talking about the bilingual brain. And this is a journey into how language doesn't just, express our thoughts. It actually physically rebuilds the very organ that creates them.
So let's just get right to it. The big question everyone always asks. Does speaking a second language actually make you smarter? I mean, it's a tempting idea, right? But the real answer, well, it's so much deeper and more fascinating than a simple yes or no.
See, it's not about just adding a new skill, like learning to juggle or something. We're talking about something way more fundamental. The constant, lifelong act of managing two languages physically rewires your brain structure and its function. Your mind is literally being remodeled by the experience. It's wild.
Okay, so let's start with that physical rewiring. How exactly does a second language get under the hood and start changing the machine itself? Let's take a look. The key concept here, the big idea, is something called neuroplasticity. And all that really means is that our brains have this incredible built-in ability to change and reorganize themselves based on our experiences. And think about it, what's a more intense or continuous experience than language? That's why the bilingual brain is just this perfect premier example of neuroplasticity in action.
So this remodeling happens in two main areas. First up, you've got your gray matter. You can think of these as the brain's processing centers, the actual factories doing the hard work of thinking. And then you've got the white matter. These are the communication highways that connect all those factories. And what's amazing is that bilingualism upgrades both.
So if we look at the gray matter, we actually see increased density in some really crucial areas. The parietal cortex, that's our language processor, it literally gets beefed up. Same goes for the frontal lobes. Think of that as the brain's CEO. And the basal ganglia, which helps automate skills. And what's really cool is that it's a dose-response relationship. The more proficient you are, and the earlier you started, the bigger these changes are. But, having powerful processing centers isn't enough. They have to be really well connected. And that's where the white matter comes in, those communication highways we talked about.
Yeah, studies show that bilinguals have stronger, more efficient white matter. The corpus callosum, which is this huge bridge connecting the two halves of your brain, it gets an upgrade. Key pathways for understanding meaning are strengthened. It really is like upgrading your brain's internet from old-school dial-up to fiber optic. Everything just gets faster and more reliable across the whole network.
Okay, so with all these physical upgrades we're seeing, it seems pretty obvious that there has to be some kind of cognitive advantage, right? Well, that very question has kicked off one of the biggest scientific detective stories in modern psychology.
The scientific view on this has swung back and forth like a pendulum. A century ago, people actually thought being bilingual was a burden on a child's development. Then, boom, 1962, a landmark study completely flips the script and suggests it creates mental flexibility. But today, the picture is a lot murkier, with a really fierce debate about whether this so-called advantage can even be reliably measured.
So the central idea, the main hypothesis, was this. The constant need to manage two languages, to pick one and actively ignore the other, that whole process acts like a continuous workout for the brain's core control system.
And this workout, as they call it, supposedly trains three key mental muscles. First, there's inhibitory control. That's the ability to constantly suppress the language you aren't using. Second is shifting. That's the mental gymnastics of flexibly switching between languages. And third is monitoring, always keeping track of the context to make sure you're using the right language at the right time.
So, if the theory is so neat and tidy, why is there so much controversy? Well, it's actually a perfect lesson in how science is supposed to work, how it corrects itself. The problem was, a lot of studies just couldn't replicate the results. Researchers also realized there was a publication bias. Basically, studies that found an advantage were just more likely to get published. Plus, those early studies didn't always account for other things like socioeconomic status or culture. The debate has been messy, but it's forced the science to get a whole lot better. But while that debate about a performance boost in younger people rages on, the evidence for a totally different kind of benefit, something much more profound and life-altering, has become incredibly strong. And this is where we find the real payoff. A powerful shield against the aging brain.
4 to 5 years. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the average delay in the diagnosis of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, for people who have been lifelong bilinguals compared to their monolingual peers. That is just staggering. So, how is this possible? The effect is explained by a concept called cognitive reserve. And this isn't about just having a bigger brain or more brain cells. Think of it as an active form of resilience. It's about having a more efficient, more flexible, better connected brain that when it starts to face damage is just better at finding detours and workarounds to get the job done.
And this leads to a really stunning, kind of counterintuitive finding that truly shows cognitive reserve in action. Let's just call it the resilience paradox.
Okay, get this. Here's the paradox. If you take two people who have the exact same level of dementia symptoms, one is monolingual, one is bilingual, and you scan their brains, the bilingual person's brain often shows way more physical signs of the disease. I'm talking more atrophy, more plaques. Their brain is actually sustaining more damage while managing to perform at the same level. They are fighting back harder to maintain function. That, right there, is cognitive reserve in its purest form.
All right, for our final piece of this puzzle, let's turn to the clinic. Because by studying what happens when the language system breaks down, say after a stroke, a condition called aphasia, we get this incredible window into how the healthy bilingual brain was actually built in the first place.
Early on, people kind of imagined languages were stored in separate little boxes in the brain. But aphasia shows us the reality is way more complex. The most common recovery pattern is parallel, where both languages come back at about the same rate. That strongly suggests they share a lot of the same neural network. But then you get these other, stranger patterns, like the antagonistic one, where as one language gets better, the other actually gets worse. Things like that show us it's really a hybrid system. It's partly shared, partly separate, and the whole shebang is managed by a control system that can also get damaged.
So let's bring all this together. This whole journey into the bilingual brain really shows us something fundamental about what it means to be human. Your experience literally becomes your biology.
So here's the bottom line. Speaking two languages physically rewires your brain, period. It builds a more efficient, more interconnected network. And while a jury is still out on whether it gives young people a simple advantage, the most powerful benefit is undeniable. Building up that cognitive reserve, which can delay the symptoms of dementia by years. It just proves the brain isn't some fixed piece of hardware, but a dynamic system that is constantly being sculpted by what we do.
When you really think about it, the bilingual brain is this stunning testament to our capacity for lifelong adaptation and resilience. It shows a mind that isn't just using a tool, it's a mind that is being fundamentally reshaped by that tool. And that leaves us with one final, pretty powerful thought. Every single day, your experiences, what you decide to learn, what you practice, what you focus on, all of it is literally sculpting the physical reality of your brain. So the real question is, what will you choose to build?